although it's understandable that this technology brings all sorts of concerns and anxieties and worries with it, and I share those, by the way, as well. It's not all excitement. I really think this is going to transform the entire tech industry. And honestly, I'm really hoping that what AI brings is it finally brings to fruition what technology was always supposed to do, but didn't. I've always felt that technology's promise is to make our lives, both personal lives and professional lives, significantly easier, significantly simpler, everything we do, and even significantly more fun.
Hi, I'm Mike Green, and welcome to Understanding Users, the podcast where I chat candidly with UX design and research professionals from around the world to hear about how they build digital products and services in a user-centered way. I have the pleasure of talking to Noam Segal, and Noam Segal has been a UX leader, UX researcher with a wealth of kind of experience across different industries and tech sectors. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Noam. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. About myself, I've been working in the realm of user experience from around 2006. And as you sort of alluded to, I've had a very diverse set of experiences in UX. I began working in this field on missile defense systems, which is a very different direction than I've taken since. I've worked in the travel space, in the business to business sort of customer support and messaging space. I've done fintech, I've done social, I've done marketplaces. Most recently, I worked at Upwork, which is a marketplace for freelancers and clients. And so I've tried all sorts of things, B2B and B2C, small and large companies, and all sorts of areas. And what can I say? I love the realm of research. I love the realm of user experience. And uh, perhaps unlike some, perhaps not. I'm not sure how contrarian this is, but I'm very excited about the kind of the next era of what we do.
And by that, I'm assuming you're talking about AI. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I guess I'm an early adopter. I guess I'm rather bullish on AI and what it brings us. I have experienced and tried and seen some incredible things by leveraging AI tools. And I think that although it's understandable that this technology brings all sorts of concerns and anxieties and worries with it, and I share those, by the way, as well. It's not all excitement. I really think this is going to transform the entire tech industry. And honestly, I'm really hoping that what AI brings is it finally brings to fruition what technology was always supposed to do, but didn't really. So by that, I mean that I've always felt that technology's promise is to make our lives, both personal lives and professional lives, significantly easier, significantly simpler, significantly more efficient and effective at everything we do, and even significantly more fun, and giving us more time to do the core things in our lives, whatever that is that brings us joy, right? And I think that, sure, we've had some successes in tech, of course, but to a great extent, I feel like technology has still, it's yet to prove its worth. I live in the United States. I've lived in the United States for a while now. And so one good example I could give you is in the healthcare space, and the fact that healthcare in the United States is just still so broken from a technological perspective. for both doctors, physicians, nurses, and all of the people that provide care, and for the patients. It's an absolute nightmare to use these technologies, and it's hurting us literally in terms of our health and well-being. So I just feel like these technologies and what they'll enable researchers specifically will help us build much better.
So the age of AI, as you've called it, as lots of others are calling it as well, it feels very much like we're on a hype cycle at the moment. And I mean, it's interesting because I was at a conference last week in Brighton on the south coast of the UK, and it was all about AI and UX, and talking to practitioners there about where we are on the hype cycle, what their use of it is, where we're going next, and hearing some fantastic speakers on kind of the what next of UX. Where do you think we are? Let's get to the nub of it. Has the hype peaked? Are we at the base of the mountain? What comes next in terms of AI?
So I'll say this. I don't think it matters. I don't think it's to show some chutzpah here. I don't think it's the right question. Look, everything in this world, or maybe everything is an exaggeration, but there are many things in this world that have a hype cycle, right? In the sense that people start getting excited and then they get very excited and then the excitement starts kind of tapering down, until it goes away. Now, the fact that there are hype cycles is just a function of how people think, which we know a lot about as researchers. And the fact that we habituate to everything, which is both the tragedy and the awesome part of humanity. We habituate to good things and we habituate to bad things. And we're so bad at forecasting how we will feel about something, a month later, a year later, not to mention 5 years or a decade later. So, of course, the level of hype about AI has risen, and we're somewhere in that hype cycle. But I don't really care because this is yet another of an endless number of hype cycles. I'm more focused on the technology itself because the power of the technology itself, it ain't a cycle. It's not going back down. It's not linear either, in the sense that we're seeing some incredible exponential advancements in
Yeah,
AI, right? Exponential. And by the way, that's not, I'm not saying by saying that the current state of AI is mind boggling. There are many AI applications and models that are completely underwhelming at this point. But what I've shared with everyone I could possibly share with is that I am much more focused on the vector than the state. I am much more focused on how quickly AI is evolving and how it's developing rather than where it's at now in terms of this capability or that capability, right? And I want to be specific to not kind of be talking in the air here. So just to wrap this particular point up and to be specific, let's take visualization, right? And AI image generation. It's still pretty bad, especially when it comes to adding text into an image. AI simply doesn't seem to be able to generate coherent text in English or any other language for that matter. It's really quite embarrassing, and it's kind of hard for someone who doesn't have a deep technical understanding in how AI works to fathom why this is still the case.
yeah,
But on the other hand, we have moved from really poor image generation to AI being able to generate an entire feature film just based on a prompt. Make a film about two people talking about research in their homes, in Florida and the UK. It's just
yeah.
it's bonkers what's happening. So you can only imagine what's going to happen, and it ain't going to be a cycle. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective, isn't it? And one of the maxims I love quoting is Amara's law. You've heard of Roy Amara, noted
Yeah.
technologist who he's often quoted as saying, the impact of technology is overestimated in the short term and underestimated in the long term. And I think there's a lot of that that's true in terms of AI. Is that there's a lot of chat, a lot of stuff's being discussed about it now, but this is genuinely transformational. It's not just in UX, it's not just in digital. This is across society as a whole, and it's happening. I mean, it's happened already. It's starting to happen, but what we're seeing is extraordinary pace of change. So to drill down a bit, then you mentioned sort of image generation, video generation. What specific tools have you used? So I mean, out of interest, as I said, when I was in this conference in Brighton last week in southern England, I was asking people, and again, people would say, obviously ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, they're the obvious, the big LLMs. A few people have used kind of Miro, some of the the whiteboarding tool, some of the AI functionality within that. Figma's obviously got some functionality, but beyond those or including those, what tools have you used and how have you found them? What kind of use cases are you putting AI to in your work?
Yeah. So I'd love to. It's a big question. It's a very important question, and I'd love to answer it by discussing these three paradigm shifts I'm noticing that are heavily influenced by AI. And for each of those paradigm shifts, I can of course give examples of specific tools and how I've used them. So let's start with the first paradigm shift, and I would define this as perhaps moving from a fairly reactive approach in research to moving to a much more proactive and automated approach to launching projects, right? And to deciding what we research. And here's my perspective on this. We've had big data about the people we serve, about our customers and about our users for a while now. But I don't think that up until fairly recently, we've had, great tools as researchers to be able to observe that data and how it's shifting in real time and come to real time conclusions about where we're seeing major issues that might indicate to us that we should do more research, right? And I think what we're seeing now is the incredibly powerful combination of the data, which has been there for a while, but with tools, to your question. And I want to highlight Sprig as one of my favorites. Sprig is a tool that wasn't built at first as an AI tool, right? I think we can divide tools into AI first, kind of built by teams who are focused on AI specifically. And the second group is tools that have incorporated AI into what they do. And those are two rather different things. Sprig began as an in product experience tool where you could send out in product surveys to your users. And I've always found that to be very powerful, just these short, punchy surveys with 2 or 3 questions about how it's going with a particular part of the experience.
So,
I'm
so it's
fairly
just in
known
time. Sorry to interrupt, but it's essentially just in time research. At the point in a
just
journey,
in time research.
you can serve them a particular question around their experience at that point. Is that right?
Just in time research, precisely.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of this. I'm a little bit known in the industry for not being the biggest fan of NPS or Net Promoter Score. One of the reasons I'm not is that if you measure NPS either at the end of an experience or just as a general question after people have used your product, it's not a very actionable piece of insight, right? And what Sprig basically were able to do is to help you create actionable points of insight across the entire customer journey. And that's an amazing thing. But the power of Sprig has absolutely blown up now with AI, because now we're able to get recommendations, real-time recommendations from AI, both on what we should be researching, how to construct the best version of the survey to address that point, and then, of course, all the way to recommendations or synthesis that leads to recommendations from that AI, the full user journey. But for this particular point and this particular paradigm shift, I do want to focus on that initial point, which is you now have this kind of high level researcher, this ever watching set of incredibly intelligent eyes, and they're looking at all of these behaviors that are happening and able to inform you, look, like, this seems like a problem, this seems like an opportunity, this seems like something we should learn more about. Do you want me to do that? And of course, the human in the loop can say yes, say no, can be involved in the synthesis and the analysis. The human is still very much going to be the person taking the recommendations and socializing them and evangelizing them and making sure that they have impact. Um, but this is an incredible thing, and I think it takes us back to kind of the classic ethnography days, where we'd go and watch people just doing their thing. We'd go to a supermarket and we'd watch people shop, and we'd be like, oh, it's kind of a hassle to put all of the stuff in the shopping cart and then take all of it out of the shopping cart and then put it back into the shopping cart. What if we could create a system that would enable people to just waltz out of the supermarket and the payment would be automatic? They wouldn't have to go through what seems to be a painful process
And unnecessary.
and unnecessary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. I'm thinking as you're talking, again, to play devil's advocate, you can see why, notwithstanding everything you've said, people are, particularly juniors in our world, are concerned that there's a risk of their own jobs. I think that's one of the things I've heard loud and clear, is that, people are still trying to figure out what's the impact on me. And obviously the broader issues within the tech sector, the tech job market, are pointing in that way. That I suppose one of the concerns I've heard, and some to a certain extent I have, not of myself, but of the industry as a whole, is that, let's say, product managers, let's say CEOs, CFOs, looking to cut corners, cut costs, who don't necessarily already buy into the value of, let's say, user research, are going to think, aha, AI, we can automate some of this stuff. We can do away with the humans. We can still gather the insights, but we can do it faster, cheaper, no less effectively. I'm not saying I agree with that. I don't. But, it's the kind of pendulum. Is it going to swing one way before it swings back again? I don't know. I don't have the answers, but none of us do yet. But I guess that is a legitimate concern that people have based on some of this tooling that's appearing.
Yeah, so before we move on to the second and the third paradigm, I want to address this directly. And I want to begin, I'll say three things. The first thing I'll say in transparency is that I have been through two layoffs, in the sense that I have been laid off, including recently. And those layoffs were partially driven by efficiencies that were gained through automation and AI. So I am no stranger to this. And I have no doubt, because I am experiencing it as personally as you can, that these technologies will have an effect on how organizations are structured, and how research teams operate. And I would, by the way, say all insight generating functions operate, not just this kind of research or that kind of research. Of course, there's going to be an impact. And of course, we need to think about what we do in this situation. I do strongly believe that one thing we should absolutely do is leverage these technologies and learn how to use them. And the second and third points I want to make is, first of all, I want to remind everyone that every system, including AI systems, there's this principle of garbage in, garbage out, and it holds with AI. AI only gives you as good of results as you prompted it in the first place. The quality of your inputs to AI systems heavily, heavily impacts the quality of the outputs. And I know this because I'm actually using AI systems.
And the training data, I
And
totally agree. But the quality of the training data used, whether it's
100%. Yes, 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 of course. Of course, of course. But our inputs as professionals and as researchers matter a lot. And I hope that CEOs and CFOs and CEOs and all of the C-suites and executives in companies realize this. If not already, then hopefully soon, right? So we need professionals to be leveraging these systems and to be giving high quality inputs, or we don't get high quality outputs. The second point is that ultimately, I think people like to connect with people. People want to hear about insights from people. People like stories. People like narratives. People appreciate discussion, and that also requires a human in the loop, so to speak. So yes, I hear you. I've been through it myself. It's hard, it's challenging, but we need to rise up to that challenge and realize that we have a very important role, even quote unquote, in the age of AI, and we have to manifest that for ourselves. So I definitely wanted to thank you for bringing that up, because I'm glad I had the opportunity to address it.
no, that fine. And you've talked to one of three paradigms. Let's go on to the second and third paradigm you were going to talk about.
Yeah, so the second paradigm is so interesting to me. Maybe the most interesting one. We have had to make tough choices up until now between quantitative and qualitative data. We were basically telling ourselves, okay, I have a decision to make here. I can either collect quantitative data at any scale I want, as long as I have the budget and access to people. But I know that those data will be fairly shallow, fairly basic. They don't give me the whys, they give me the whats. There's all sorts of ways to describe this, but there's only so much you can do in a survey or even by looking at behavioral kind of log type data. And then on the other hand, we had qualitative research, and we would always get feedback from engineering partners and others that the issue with qualitative research is it's so limited in its scale. Why should I believe what you're telling me, even though you spoke to 5 people or 10 people or maybe 15 people? Why should I care about that stuff? Now, we know the answer, and we know that you should care about that stuff, but we also recognize that even if those insights are incredibly deep and rich, or as Sam Ladno calls it, thick data, yes, they are limited in scale. And I imagine that on occasion, even us researchers do kind of wish that we could collect qualitative research at scale, even if it's just to appease our partners and tell them, check this out, Mrs. Engineer, I have brought you 500 deep, qualitative, rich interviews. Now what are you going to tell me? Like, now what do you have to say?
Right, it's the famous 5-6 user problem, isn't it? That is perennial. Anyone who's ever done research and presented research internally, you're absolutely
Yeah.
spot on. It's like the engineers and the often decision makers shrug their shoulders and go, "Well, 6 people. I'm not going to make a decision based on that."
Yeah, exactly. and I've written and spoken rather extensively on the whole we only need to talk to 5 users thing. I have my opinions, but I'd rather focus on the fact that now, fast forward to today, we are breaking that paradigm. And you asked about tools. I want to highlight a particular tool I've used. It's called Genway or Genway AI. And what Genway is, it's an AI led interviewer. And so this is a system that can conduct incredible interviews, high quality interviews that mimic so many of our best practices as human researchers already. And it can conduct as many interviews as people you have to interview. You know, you can feed this system, which is a learning system. It's an AI system, so it just gets better and better the more people you interview. And to your point about training data, you can train it on prior interviews or whatever best practices you want to train it on. And this system can conduct simply an endless number of interviews, right? No more scheduling issues, no more language limitations, because it can interview in multiple languages, which most of us don't speak. Although the listeners can't see this, but I do have a Duolingo plushie in my office because I'm a huge Duolingo fan, and I'm trying my best to learn Spanish and German. Those are the two languages I'm most focused on and have been for a while. But look, most of us don't speak more than 1, 2, or maybe 3 languages. These systems can speak way more than that. They can conduct research at any time on any device.
Yeah.
And not only that, but these systems are also then giving you, a certain level of synthesis and analysis, which you still have to work with and look at and analyze yourself and come to your conclusions and kind of massage the themes that are coming out a little bit. But this paradigm, thanks to Genway, of having to choose between qual and quant, it's gone. It's literally evaporated. And that's a pretty wild thing, in my opinion.
And to your point about the synthesis, I was thinking, I absolutely agree with everything you said. But if you go from, we all know doing a round of research with half a dozen, maybe up to a dozen, although that's quite a lot in one round of research, the analysis and synthesis on that, to doing dozens or even hundreds, the rate limiting factor becomes the human researcher in the loop to actually do the analysis and synthesis. So it therefore presupposes that the tools are able to do at least some of that to enable the kind of rapidity to continue. But yeah,
Well, and not surprisingly, that's the third paradigm, in my opinion.
right.
So we can get to that once we feel like we've finished with the second one. But yes, I agree.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to that third one. Tell me more.
Yeah. So we can now launch research proactively based on a wealth of knowledge that we have about the people we serve, and tools like Sprig are doing this, and there are other tools that are doing this as well. And then we can launch as many interviews as we want, thanks to tools like Genway, which is, again, just breaking this like qual quant spectrum. But to your point, that leaves us with a need to analyze incredibly large amounts of data, right? And that's an issue. I am really excited about what I'm seeing in the space of AI synthesis, analysis, data visualization tools. Um, I've kind of used two types of these tools. The first type is the same tools that you mentioned earlier that a lot of people are using. These are kind of the all-purpose, all-in-one tools, the Chat GPTs and the Claudes of the world, they are doing a great job at maybe not fully synthesizing data, but certainly summarizing trends and also being able to tell you about relationships that these tools are noticing between different variables in your data set, right? So they are good at identifying those. Um, and they're even good at things that are rather surprising to me. For example, at least in my research, I often start with hypotheses, right? And I kind of test them through the research, and then I see the results, and those results yield further hypotheses about what I think is going on. And it's a cyclical process, right? Where and then we go and do more research. And I did not think that ChatGPT was at the point where it could generate really interesting, thoughtful, and sensible hypotheses about what it's seeing. You know, why is this particular segment, this particular demographic group behaving in this way? I ask ChatGPT, and it's like, oh, well, we think it's because of this thing and that thing. And I'm like, wow, I think you might be right. And I would absolutely go and explore that. I think it's worth investing energy in exploring that, which of course I don't have to invest that much energy because C paradigms 1 and 2,
Yes.
right? But that's an incredible thing. The other class of tools I've been using is data analysis and visualization tools that are dedicated really just to that. And so one example I can give is Julius AI, which is an interesting one because it's being used by academics and industry people alike. So it's loved by both of those groups, who often have some disagreements between them, academics and industry folks. It's incredible how you can analyze all of your data with this kind of computational AI and get awesome insights. And what's cool about a tool like Julius, I'm not sure if you've experienced this type of tool, is that what it's essentially doing is generating either R or Python code.
So to just take
And
a step
so
back, sorry, I'm not familiar with Julia. So you upload your insights, is that right? How does the tool work?
with Julius and many other tools, by the way,
Yeah.
it's just an example. Um, and I don't have a financial or other relationship to any of the tools mentioned, to be clear. So this tool Julius takes in your data. You upload your data, um, which you still need to clean a little bit. For those of you who are more quantitatively minded, you know that a big part of data analysis is cleaning your data, organizing it, sorting it, dealing with missing data, dealing with outliers, all sorts of things. I don't find these systems to be great at that yet,
Right.
although they do that as well. But then once you upload your data, the kind of CSV file or whatever, whatever format it's in, these tools are able to analyze and synthesize those data for you and do all sorts of modeling and different analyses and charting and graphing and generating reports for you. And this thing I wanted to share about the R and the Python thing, I think it's interesting because it's another example of where we can add value, right? So basically, I over the years have focused on R rather than Python, and even though I have learned R, I haven't applied it much because I've been a manager, I've been a leader. So I haven't, done that many kind of individual contributor projects, sorry. And so, when you don't use something, you lose it, right? When you don't use R code in your day to day, you lose it. what's cool about these tools is that what they're essentially doing is they are generating either R or Python code based on your preference, and then they're running that code. Now, if that code, if there are issues in it, yes, you can ask the system to fix those issues, but still, these systems they're a bit iffy at that point. So they really get you to 90% of the work. They don't get you to that kind of the equivalent of the last mile, the
Mm,
last mile of analysis. Just like in transportation, we have the last mile
yep.
problem, right? Of getting from the train station to wherever you need. So what's cool is that even though I haven't been using R consistently, because I learned it, I am able to take that 90%, that code block that the system generated, and understand it. And then I can just make these little fixes. I am the last mile person, just making sure that this code is exactly where I want it for the perfect visualization or the perfect analysis. And so I have an important role here as the researcher, right? And then of course, once the code's generated, I mean, I can very easily copy paste it into my own sort of notebook and just repurpose that code for similar surveys without ever touching, these AI tools again, potentially, if I wanted to do that. So I guess there's all sorts of ways to collaborate with AI, right? I see AI as a partner. I see AI as a collaborator. I see us as having to ponder on what sort of relationships we build with AI, right? All of
That
these tools I mentioned, we have relationships with them essentially.
that's really interesting because that's literally the next question I was going to come on to is how this collaboration will work in future. And as you're talking, I'm thinking I'm reading a book at the moment by Ethan Mollick, who's a professor I think at Wharton Business School, and he does a lot of he's got a Substack and he does a lot of work with I think US government as well and startups and industry in general on AI, the use of AI in corporations, how it's developing. And he talks about, which really resonated, the centaur versus cyborg models. So the centaur is half man, half woman, half horse from Greek mythology, where there's a sort of clear delineation
Yep.
between animal and human. And the cyborg is more like the Terminator, where we are sort of flesh but also machine, and it's almost indistinguishable. And it's kind of to what extent will our use of AI be that sort of centaur model? To what extent will it be a cyborg model, or will it be something else? I mean, obviously they're sort of crude archetypes, if you like. But I thought that's quite interesting, and it speaks to what you were saying about how will we? Is it going to be so enmeshed in our day-to-day work that we just won't know what's human, what's AI, or is it going to be something different?
I mean, that's such a tough question, and um, I'm not a religious individual, but the Bible does tell us that the prophecy was given to the fools, right? So I try not to be a prophet because I don't know. I do know that I love both centaurs and cyborgs, so I find that pretty cool to think about, and I do suspect, again, I don't want to prophesize, but I do suspect that um, part of the reality of a technology improving to the extent that AI is already and will continue to improve is that you do kind of lose the ability to differentiate what has been generated by AI and what has been generated by a human. There's this concept that comes, I forget where it originally came from, if it's kind of more from graphics or something else, but the concept of the uncanny valley,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um, it's this, it's really a psychological phenomenon more than anything. And it's this feeling of unease we get when we see something that resembles a human or resembles something that we can identify, but it's not quite there. Something is off. And even though that something is fairly minute, it's fairly minor, it really, really creeps us out. It's almost as if it's worse that it's so close to being the real deal, but it's not.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that we are still deep in the uncanny valley with AI when it comes to so many things. Right? In the sense that, sure, maybe AI is coming close in certain ways to generating things that can't be differentiated, but they still very much can be. And it's a little bit creepy to say the least. But again, I'm more focused on the vector than the state. And I doubt that we're going to remain in the uncanny valley for that much longer. I don't want to put a number on it. I really don't, but I don't think it's going to be that long. So does that fit with the centaur model or the cyborg model? I don't really know. I'm guessing maybe the cyborg, because kind of the cyborg model is more integrated. There's less of a delineation between the human part and the non-human part. So I guess I'm team cyborg based on that. But honestly, it's tough. It's a
It
tough
certainly
call.
is. Team Cyborg, you heard it here first from Noam. I think I go back to one of the points you mentioned earlier, which I totally agree with, is that this things are changing so fast that almost the moment even a conversation like this will be out of date in 6 months, 12 months, because everything has, so I did a brief online course recently on prompt engineering, which kind of improved my prompt game to a certain extent and was fascinating to do. But even as I'm doing it, I'm thinking the pace of LLM development, probably being able to, or the requirement to be able to formulate a prompt in a way that generates the right or useful output, who knows whether in 12 or 18, 24 months that'll still be even necessary because of the speed of development. So all of this is to play for. But I guess that brings me on to my next question is, so how do we, and we've sort of touched on this a little bit already, but thinking about it in more detail, how do we as researchers, how does the research community, the human research community, upskill itself, prepare itself, ensure its use and necessity, and its role in the future in this AI human world?
Yeah. Look, I mean, my call to people listening to this is that on the one hand, it's important to listen to discussions like this. It's important to read up on things and experience AI that way. But I think it's absolutely critical that people don't stay on the sidelines in this particular case. I don't think any of us can afford to focus all of our attention on reading and listening to other people talking about AI. So I'm very grateful to everyone listening to this, and again, thank you, Mike, for inviting me. It's delightful to discuss this. But I think once you've listened to us, once you've read up, go and tinker with AI systems, learn them by using them. And by the way, learn their downsides as well. Experience the issues. Be part of making these systems not just better and more performant, but also more in line with basic human values, morals, and ethics. Which is, I wouldn't want to end this podcast without mentioning that. We are in danger of creating systems that are not aligned with how we would love for the world to be. And all of these systems, again, to the point of kind of garbage in, garbage out. If we put things into these systems, and we already have, to be clear, that perpetuate all of the issues that humanity has created throughout its history, then we are going to experience some very difficult things moving forward. And so, in my view, once you're done, with walking your dog and listening to a podcast, once you're done reading in bed about AI, wake up, go to your desk, open your computer, and go into these systems and use them. Understand the positives and the negatives. understand the incredible abilities they already have, but also the limitations, and share with the rest of us what's going on and what you're observing, because we'd love to learn as well, and we'd love to collectively make these systems better. I don't think we can afford anything but that. I think we all have to kind of try to do our best here.
Yeah. No, and again, the ethics and that was something else. I mean, you've raised it there, but we haven't touched on that so much. But how do we ensure transparency and accountability of these tools in terms of research and kind of the feedback and the insights we're giving? Ethical, collecting data ethically, using that data ethically. I mean, these are all critical things. But how do we? How do you envisage? Let's fast forward. I mean, it's a very hard question to answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. 2, 3, 4, let's say 5 years time, for a junior UX researcher, kind of getting to grips with the field. How do you envisage a day-to-day role looking?
Yeah, it is a tough question. I do want to go back to something you said there a second ago, and I think this also does pertain to junior roles or early career roles or any roles. As UX professionals, one reason why this is an exciting time is that we are in the very early days of the user experience of leveraging AI systems, right? I mean, if you think that ChatGPT is going to remain this, blank field you put a prompt into forever, then I would disagree. And so I think as UX professionals, one thing we are already doing and should continue to do and lean into is we have a huge role here in determining what is the user experience of using AI tools. And that's a role that is there for early career researchers all the way to the most senior researchers. So if you ask me about the future of early career researchers, I think part of it is working on AI systems and improving them for people, and maybe improving augmented reality systems and virtual reality systems if that's going to end up being a thing. Let's not get into that discussion. So we have these new platforms, these new ways of interaction. It's all very novel, and we need everyone from early career to later career. The second thing I'll say is that AI incredibly benefits earlier career people because it accelerates the trajectory of your learning and your abilities exponentially. I have 3 children, and I'm just noticing through them, the things they can figure out now, thanks to their interactions with AI and their interactions with the Alexas and Siris and Googles of the world. It's incredible. So one thing I believe about early career researchers is that they might be technically early in their career because they just graduated from whatever school they went to or whatever, but their access to knowledge and their access to tools is something that we never had when we were earlier in our career. Not sure if it's okay to use, a curse word or two in this podcast, but we had to figure out our shit. We just a few years ago did not have access to these tools. And so I think that's incredible news for early career researchers. They are going to have to leverage the tools they have to show up as non-early career researchers, which is both a blessing and a challenge, but it is what it is. And then the last thing, yeah, and then the last thing I'll just say on this topic is I do foresee more of an importance, and this is maybe not surprising coming from someone who was and maybe still is to a certain extent a relationships researcher. I believe that relationships are going to be increasingly important because, again, I think ultimately technology will continue to be built through partnerships between people, and those people will be leveraging a new generation of tools. But ultimately, researchers will be, I want to say, will continue to be, honestly, partners, and those relationships will be absolutely key.
That's a nice, upbeat way to end this, Noam. So I just want to say thank you so much for a fascinating chat. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for joining us. And final question, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. This was absolutely lovely. I'm so delighted to have the opportunity. And again, I do think that involvement is important, but hopefully, this podcast episode gives people the inspiration and the interest to become more involved. So thanks for having me. If people want to find me, I think the place I am the most is LinkedIn. If you search for me on LinkedIn, I'm not too hard to find. So definitely chat with me there. I do also frequent other other platforms, but yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to find me. And I would absolutely love to have discussions with anyone who wants to, or help answer questions about tools I've used and how I've used them, or connect you with various people. So please feel free to be in touch.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Understanding Users. If you enjoyed what you heard, do please like or comment wherever you're listening, and feel free to share this episode more widely. And feel free, of course, to drop me a line with any feedback via LinkedIn or my website, researchable.uk. Join me again next time when I'll be sharing some more insights from digital design professionals. Until then, stay safe and stay user-centered.